On the 24th of February, 1743, at Argyle Street, Sarah Banks gave birth to a child who would, in the words of another great natural scientist, Sir David Attenborough, become the greatest pangendrum of British science. Just 7 families from all of Britain were deemed worthy of mention in the Gentleman's Magazine when it listed notable births for that month. The son of W.M. Banks was named Joseph and baptized on the 9th of March by the Reverend Mr. Cox in Christopher Warren's St. James Church, Piccadilly. 20 months after his birth, he was joined by his sister, Sarah Sophia Banks, who would be his lifelong shadow and collaborator. Their love for the natural world would be fueled by the delights of the Ravesby estate. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the history of fresh produce. So this passage I just read was from the Grant Lee Kiza's book, Banks, and it is describing the birth of none other than Joseph Banks. And let me just say, Patrick, if the age of discovery had rock stars, this guy was one of them. Because Banks was a man whose obsession with plants reshaped agriculture, transformed Britain's relationship to fresh produce, and helped really turn exploration into a kind of scientific gold rush. And today, to kick off this new year, 2026, we're launching a brand new multi-part series on the life of this impressive man. And across this series, we're going to follow him from the quiet fields in England to the edges of the known world, from Newfoundland to Tahiti to Australia, and watch how this one man's fixation on plants just helped build empires and feed populations and just really change what grew on dinner plates across the globe.
I'm excited. Okay. I do love these multi-part series, and I have a feeling, okay, this is going to be a good one. Okay. Starting off the year strong, everyone. I mean,
That's how we do it.
from what you described, this doesn't seem to be a man who just pressured, or pressed flowers into notebooks, right?
No, very much not. He's more like the godfather of global botany.
Right.
He's kind of like the first botanical spy, and we've had a few of them on this show. He's kind of the godfather of that. So he, kind of another kind of way to think about this. The captain steered the ship, but Banks decided what the voyage was for. I mean, this is the kind of guy he was. And before he becomes the most powerful plant broker in human history, before he reshapes Kew Gardens into the engine room of the British Empire, we have to start somewhere much quieter. And that's with a privileged boy who, against all expectations, decides that Greek and Latin just bore him, but that weeds fascinate him. So today, in this first part of our multi-part series, we're going to look at Banks's early life up to his very first maritime adventure. So Joseph Banks, as we've heard at the top, so he was born on the 24th of February, 1743 in Lincolnshire into extraordinary comfort. So his father, William Banks, was a wealthy landowner, the kind of man whose life followed a very predictable path of the time. So estates, rents, status, politics, and a tasteful amount of classical education. And so Joseph, by all rights, should have followed exactly the same script.
You would think, right? I mean, no, the grand tour by polite learning, profitable marriage, that sort of thing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, pretty much
Okay.
the polished conveyor belt of 18th century privilege, right? That's
Okay.
the kind of things you kind of see like in Bridgerton or things like that. But the problem, or perhaps the miracle for the sake of our story, was that young Joseph Banks simply wasn't interested in playing the part. So from an early childhood, what he loved most was the outdoors. And I don't mean riding across it triumphantly on his own like private little horse or something, but he enjoyed studying it closely, crawling through it, learning its names. He collected plants and insects just like many other boys of his class did. But while the passion would eventually leave his peers, it only grew stronger with him. And so long before he ever stepped inside a university, he was already developing the habits of a field naturalist. So at the age of 9, he was sent off to Harrow School, already a world away from his Lincolnshire hedgerows. And 4 years after that, he transferred to Eton. And Eton in the mid 18th century was, as you expect, deeply classical, so Latin, Greek, rhetoric, literature, the making of a gentleman. And Banks did it dutifully, but also badly and without much joy.
You can almost see the teacher's progress reports now.
Yeah, but it wasn't a disaster, okay?
Okay.
But he was never going to be a star classicist, right? What he wanted, what genuinely excited him had no place on the curriculum at this period in history. Because at Eton, he made a fateful decision. He would far rather study plants and animals than ancient texts. And since no one at school was particularly interested in teaching botany, Banks took matters into his own hands. And so his earliest teachers weren't professors, they were local women, the plant gatherers who supplied apothecaries, the medicine makers of the 18th century. And so Joseph
Right.
would actually pay them 6 pence per lesson, which was a pretty decent sum at the time, for every scrap of knowledge they could offer about roots and leaves, healing herbs, and poisonous plants. So again, this wasn't polite curiosity from Joseph. This was a working education in how plants actually functioned in the real economy of food and medicine.
You're so right. Let me think about this, right? And we're gonna be talking a lot, but which this is already a very on brand, right, for the man he'll become. Am I
Like,
right? Like, think
oh
about
yeah,
it.
this is his
Yeah.
personality that's going to carry through with the rest of
Oh
his
my gosh.
life. And I mean, we can already see the pattern, right? His curiosity backed by money and of course by
Mhm.
initiative as well. So if knowledge didn't exist where he needed it, he simply went out and bought it. And so at 17, in December of 1760, Banks entered Christchurch, Oxford, as a gentleman commoner. And this was
Okay.
a prestigious category. So he paid higher fees, but he also wore fancy robes and wasn't expected to break a sweat academically. And here, something enormous happened. So during his first year at Oxford, his father, William, died suddenly at the age of just 41 years old. And at this point, Joseph is 18. Now, this results, it resulted actually in something quite extraordinary because when he came of age at 21, Banks now inherited this vast Lincolnshire estates of his father, and along with it, an annual income of
Which in
£6,000.
modern day money is what roughly, John?
So if you were to do it roughly in today's money, that's, I would say, comfortably over £1 million a year, sometimes far more, depending on how you calculate it. So
That's a lot. I mean, th
I'd take a $1 million
is
salary
that
every year.
all?
Yeah, yeah, just a little thing to get you
I'm
going.
broke. What
Yeah,
do you make a year? 1,000,000?
yeah, just 1 million. Didn't even have to work for it. But yeah, I mean, look, the essential point is this. So Joseph Banks instantly became one of the wealthiest young men in England. And here's where the story could have taken a very, very different turn. He could have vanished into indulgence. He could have spent wildly, gambled, married strategically, lived fast and burned out. And again, many men in his position did exactly that. That was not uncommon by any means. However, Banks did not do this. So contemporary observers were struck just by how composed he remained. There was no reckless borrowing, there was no wild living, and much of the credit actually seems to belong to his mother, which is a woman that was described as sharp, disciplined, and deeply sensible.
You're so right too. And let's keep thinking about that. And mom kept the fortune intact, right? While he
Yeah,
prepared to spend it on everyone plants,
that's
right?
right. And not just spend it lightly, but on an industrial
I like
scale.
this guy.
I mean, this is a guy that loves plants, and so if we come back to his academics, so at Oxford, the staff there were not overly impressed with him.
No.
He was known among fellow students as quote the fellow who knew nothing of Greek,
Jeez.
and one contemporary recalled that when Banks entered rooms where classical debates were underway, the students would sneer, "Here's Banks, but he knows nothing of Greek."
Wow.
But Banks never argued. He kept it cool, and in fact, he would actually just say to himself. Another contemporary observer said that he would say, "I shall very soon beat you all in a kind of knowledge I think infinitely more important." So a silent burn to those people, and this is the pivot. because during the 1760s, during Banks' youth, botany itself was undergoing this tremendous revolution. So, a Swedish naturalist named Carl Linnaeus, some of our listeners might recognize the name, had just published a radical new system for organizing the plant world. So, instead of the endless descriptive names and chaotic groupings, Linnaeus introduced a clean sexual classification system, counting stamens and pistils in a two-part binomial name, genus and species. And of course, that's a system we all still use today, especially in our produce industry, right? We talk about genus and species or varieties. And so at the University of Uppsala, Linnaeus trained a small army of devoted students, many of whom ended up fanning out across the globe, collecting specimens and spreading this new botanical language. And as you can imagine, Banks desperately wanted to learn this, but Oxford couldn't teach it. So what did he do?
There's always a what
He
did you do?
what did he do? Well, we kind of had a little bit of foreshadowing of this earlier. So he used his money. He paid for a botanist from Cambridge to come to Oxford and teach. And so in the summer of 1764, thanks entirely to Banks' personal
Right.
funding and with the quiet approval of the Sheridan professor of botany, Humphrey Sipthorpe, who never really taught much at all, a young Cambridge botanist named Israel Lyons delivered a course of Linnaean botany to a group of about 60 eager students. And it was one of the earliest formal introductions of Linnaean science into Oxford.
Isn't that so crazy too? Like, so he essentially installed his own department.
Yeah. Yeah. A ghost department funded
Jeez.
by sheer enthusiasm and his inherited wealth. So good for Banks. And as you might not be surprised, Banks and Lyons quickly became close friends. And Lyons didn't just teach him taxonomy. Okay. He plugs Lyons directly into the European scientific network that revolved around Linnaeus himself. So Banks, unfortunately, would never meet Linnaeus in person, but the Linnaean intellectual bloodstream ran straight through him for the rest of his life. And so shortly after this, Banks did something else that signaled just how unconventional his path would be. He leaves Oxford without taking a degree.
Yeah, and isn't that funny? A department he starts, but then doesn't take a degree,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
I mean, it's but you think about it. In that world though, is a bit like voluntarily tearing up your passport to like a polite society.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're a person of his status, the family comes. I mean, you're expected
Yeah,
to
yeah.
to
You know,
go to
you have to
university and have a
finish.
degree. Yeah,
It's like some of those
but you know what?
shows, I mean, I know, like, we thought we always wanna throw in, like, the, Today's World, like, you see some of these shows that are actually, like, going back, like,
Mm,
they're played in modern days, and "You are my only heir, and yours to do this,"
yeah, yeah,
and,
exactly.
very to the tip for the T of the family name, like, "You carry my last name," like, right?
Yeah, big expectations. But for
True.
Banks, I mean, he clearly
I
didn't
like this
care
guy.
because Uh, by then, he knew exactly who he was going to be, and it certainly wasn't going to be a lawyer or a doctor or anything like that. So he ends up moving to Bloomsbury near the newly opened British Museum, and at the time, this was the only public space in London where natural history could be seriously studied. So on the 3rd of August, 1764, he obtains a reader's ticket, and that effectively moves him into the museum's collections. And there, among the great herbaria and books and drawings and specimens of the living world, Banks began to live like a monk of botany. I mean, this is where he spent all his time. And because of that, he met some of the greatest emotional, intellectual anchors of his life. And that singular person would have been Daniel Solander. And Solander was a Swedish naturalist, a former student of Linnaeus himself. And he's described in the Akiza's Banks book as being short, stout, fair haired, absent minded, given to bright waistcoats and cheerful gossip. So that's
Okay.
a little bit of a flavor of Solander. And Solander had arrived in London to spread the Linnaean system and had become assistant librarian at the British Museum.
Okay.
Another, I won't say fun fact, but interesting fact about Slander was that he also had heartbreakingly fallen in love with Linnaeus's eldest daughter, who ended up actually marrying someone else at the end of the day. So,
So, botanists were already living very complicated emotional lives is what you're saying.
Yeah,
They
I
always
guess they
have,
always
right?
have. They always have.
Oh
Poor Slander.
gosh.
But that's okay because Banks and Slander become quite simply inseparable from that moment on. I mean, these are soulmates in science where Banks brought the money, the connections, the boldness, and Solander brought deep learning, method, and international credibility. And so through Solander, Banks began corresponding with the towering figures of European botany. And also through Solander, Banks gained legitimacy. And so remarkably, at just 23 years old, that's how old Banks is at this point, he was elected a fellow of the Royal Society in his absence, nonetheless, in 1766. And we'll talk a little bit more of the context of why he was absent shortly. But this was not the world lightly opening its doors to Banks. This was a young man being rapidly pulled into the gravitational center of British science. And all of this is happening while Banks is still barely out of youth. I mean, he's a rich landowner, he's a semi dropout, he's a plant obsessive, and he's a rising scientific power broker. And Banks wanted to explore plants that could reshape diets, plants that could transform colonial economies,
Yeah.
plants that could be transplanted across continents to feed
I mean,
empires.
so even before he ever boards a ship, everyone, the global produce revolution has already begun in his head.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So before he even sees an iceberg or a coral reef or a breadfruit tree, he has already imagined a world rearranged by seeds. But imagination is not enough for a man like Banks, right? Of course it isn't. He wants salt winds. He wants dangerous weather. He wants specimens torn from the edge of the known world. And that brings us quite dramatically to the first time he finally leaves Britain behind. And it's not to Tahiti, it's not to Australia, but to somewhere colder, rougher, and far nearer to home than we might expect. Because his first taste of global exploration, Patrick, comes not in the South Seas, but in Newfoundland.
You
Or
are in
Newfoundland.
Newfoundland, yeah, however you wanna say it. The
Yeah.
exciting frontier of Newfoundland, a sentence our listeners probably would never imagine hearing, right? But yes, if
The adventures of
the
Newfoundland.
adventures of, right? If Joseph Banks' childhood gave him the spark, then Newfoundland was the first time he really threw himself onto the bonfire, right? And he was
Yeah.
23 years old, young, wealthy, a big green in the face when the sea got really rough. But absolutely bursting with curiosity. And in April 1766, he finally got the chance he'd been itching for, a proper voyage into the unknown, right? As
Yeah.
one does at 23, most people go backpacking around Europe. I don't know, maybe go to Costa Rica. Banks bounds off to the edge of the North Atlantic. I mean, think about
Right.
that, John.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as I keep moving forward, I want to keep going and at an 18th century internship, right? Well,
That's what it sounds like, right?
actually, Banks later called it a postgraduate field trip. Although with Banks, that meant something rather grander than a few weeks scribbling notes in a Paris cafe, right?
Yeah.
He had managed, with the help of his well-placed friends, notably Lord Sandwich, to join HMS Niger as it headed back to Newfoundland and Labrador. The ship was commanded by Sir Thomas Adams, but crucially, Banks also knew another man on board. That's right, his old Eton friend, Lieutenant Constantine Phipps. That friendship helped open the door, and Banks eagerly stepped through it.
And I'm just going to jump in quickly because I want to give our listeners a bit of a pen portrait of Lord Sandwich because he's actually quite a character and he'll be making further appearances
Another
later in our
appearance.
series. Yeah. So I know you chuckled at his name. I know this, but funny enough, this guy apparently he is attributed to the naming of the sandwich that we know. But this story for another time. But the Earl of Sandwich, and his real name was John Montague, was actually a landowner neighbor of Banks. And because Sandwich also had a great interest in botany, they naturally became friends and fishing and drinking buddies. But Sandwich was not exactly the young, attractive man like Banks. He was 25 years Banks senior and is described in Keyes' book as by, quote, no means a handsome man with a long, thin, haggard face and an awkward, careless gait like a stringless puppet.
Wow.
But, appearance all aside, Sandwich was a good man to be connected with because he'd end up becoming the first lord of the Admiralty. And for our listeners that don't know what that means, he that's basically the political head of the British Royal Navy. So not a bad person to know if you want to secure your spot on a British ship going forward. So just
right?
keep
Now,
that in mind.
the official purpose of the voyage was to transport mariners, right, to build a fort and survey the coast. But for Banks, this was an extraordinary botanical opportunity. Okay, a chance to collect plants, animals, anything that grew, flew, or wiggled, or crawled, or swarm. Right,
Yeah,
swam. I mean, in a landscape almost entirely unfamiliar to European naturalists.
yeah. And knowing the kind of man Banks is at this point, he didn't waste any time, did he? I mean, this guy's he's going to be the first one off.
No, not even a moment, okay? So the Niger left Plymouth on 22 of April. By the next day, they were out in open ocean. Banks cheerfully, right, noting seaweeds and watching the young sharks, right, which he wrote irritably, like absolutely refused to bite any of the hooks that sailors dangled over the side, okay? But the romance of natural history soon gave way to the realities of Atlantic weather. For 2 days, the gales were so fierce, Banks could barely write. Later, he admitted the voyage was one continued puke, a
Mhm.
line that makes you wonder whether even the greatest naturalists occasionally question their life choices.
Man, I would have been done. I've been in a boat in the Atlantic in Ireland one time, and those waves can be rough. So
I don't do cruises.
I can't do that. But actually, this wasn't even the worst of it because he would also end up getting quite ill once he reached North America to the point where he thought he was going to die. So, you know,
Or
he, he
that
had
is true. That is true. But in the end, okay, in the end, Banks's solidarity soldiered actually through it, right? And on the 20th day, the 11th of May, they reached Newfoundland. Okay, and let's say this: snow still covered, John, right? This land, the ground, but Banks was off the ship almost immediately, racing into the woods with the enthusiasm of a spaniel let off the to the lead, right? Or maybe he was going to go puke or kiss the land, right? And what he found though was three varieties of spruce, black, white, and the wee-mouth pine, various lichens, rare northern plants, water beetles, and what would eventually become nearly 340 plant specimens collected over the course of the voyage. So for almost 6 months, he spent roaming the coasts and forests of Newfoundland and Labrador. On October 28th, 1766, Banks sailed from St. John. Just days later, off the Azores on November 5th, he recorded waves so enormous that they smashed through his cabin, destroyed nearly all his chairs and tables, and soaked his precious seeds and plant boxes, John.
yeah, yeah. It's easy for forget, right? I mean, how precious collecting plants can be. A single storm could ruin just months of painstaking work, and this is a time before planes. You can't just jump on a plane and go get that stuff back.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet, despite the dangers, the expedition was a scientific triumph. Banks returned with birds, insects, fishes, and crucially, he produced the first linear description of the flora and fauna of Newfoundland and Labrador. He documented 34 species of birds, including the great auk, a bird he spotted on 7th of May, swimming around the ship in the Grand Banks. Sadly, this would be an animal that would go extinct in 1844 due to overhunting for its feathers, meat, and oil. But this kind of work, painstaking adventures, utterly novel, caught the attention of London's scientific world immediately. Banks was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society where he was still at sea. And when he returned in early 1767, artists like George Ehret and the young Sidney Parkinson were soon helping him illustrate and classify his specimens. His arrival back in England was almost like a triumphant homecoming of knowledge.
Yeah. And again, all of this before the age of 24. I mean, it's incredible. And it's not bad for a young man whose main complaint had been the relentless seasickness, right? I mean, it's amazing.
I mean, right? That's not bad at all. But here's the thing: Banks didn't just bring plants. He brought back credibility. His Newfoundland journals, his specimens, right? His connections, the sheer quality of the work. This was the moment he stepped right properly into the center of British science. It also meant that when the Royal Society began planning something much, much bigger, a global scientific collaboration to observe the 1769 transit of Venus, one of the most important astronomical events of the century. Banks was perfectly positioned to seize this opportunity. Okay. And that opportunity, of course, would lead him to a certain ship with a certain captain on a voyage that would change science, empire, and the history of fresh produce forever, John.
What a cliffhanger, Patrick. I think we should take a break here to collect ourselves and prepare for the excitement that's coming. There's a lot of it.
Absolutely. So when we return, we'll find out how a young botanist with curiosity, money, and ambition managed to secure a place on the most important scientific voyage of the 18th century. We'll be right back.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the history of fresh produce. So, Patrick, in the first half, we heard about Banks's first adventure to the exciting destination of Newfoundland. But this was merely an appetizer of the main course to come, right? Because as you teased before the break, there's another voyage on the horizon that will completely dwarf this first expedition. Because for all his youth, his money, and connections, Banks wasn't content simply to poke around the cold edges of the North Atlantic, right? I mean, what he wanted, what he ached for, was the big stage, the great unknown, the place where no gentleman naturalist had ever set foot before. And as it turned out, the cosmos itself was about to hand him that stage because one of the most consequential scientific moments of the 18th century was looming. And you mentioned it just before we went to break, and that is the 1769 transit of Venus. And what it is basically is a tiny black dot crawling across the face of the sun. So to the average person, it doesn't seem any amazing, but for astronomers, it was the key to calculating the size of the solar system. And, very useful if you happen to be a seafaring nation trying not to crash into things in the middle of the Pacific.
100%. You make it sound like the Royal Society was on the verge of falling into a cosmic panic.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, in some ways they were, right? So on the 15th of February, 1768, they marched up to King George III with what was essentially a royal begging letter, and it was politely titled "A Memorial for Improving Natural Knowledge." And behind that flattering language, the message was basically, "Your Majesty, we are broke. We need £4,000, and also the French, Spanish, Danes, Swedes, and Russians are all preparing for the transit, and we simply cannot be humiliated by the Danes again."
Don't you love how it's always like, hey, don't humiliate us again, right? You can't really. I mean, once the Danes have beaten you to something, that's it. Okay, the shame is eternal at this point.
Yeah, basically, especially for the British. And so the king, so again, young George III, or as our American listeners will know as the Mad King George, that's the same guy we're talking about here. But he was quite keen on science and very keen on Britain looking like the cleverest nation on earth, especially when their arch rivals, the French, were in close competition with them. So for him, this was somewhat of a no-brainer. He agreed to this. And so suddenly the Admiralty was ordered to provide a ship. And by the end of March 1768, they had chosen one. And it was a sturdy Whitby coal ship named the Earl of Pembroke. Not prestigious, not glamorous, and certainly not designed with the comfort of wealthy plant collecting socialists in mind, but it was solid. And it was basically a floating barn, which for a voyage into the uncharted Pacific was exactly what you wanted. And so by the 5th of April, she had a new name, and that was the HMS Endeavour. And orders were to be made to ready her to carry a team of observers to the Southern Oceans, though there was no commander yet and no confirmed destination.
I mean, small detail when you're selling 15,000 miles, right?
Yeah, but fate had already begun rearranging itself because in
Okay.
London, at that exact moment, was a 40-year-old Yorkshireman named James Cook.
Now, our old friend from the Hawaii series, if you remember. Good
Yes.
to have Cook back on the show, especially since the last time we had seen him, he was kind of, dead.
Yeah, he had a. We were kind of at the end of his life when we told that story. So this is going to be not at the end of his life. He has a lot of life left to live and adventures.
Foreshadowing.
So, but yes, there will be some interesting context. So if you haven't heard our Hawaii episode, I think that was 2 years ago. That's how we kicked off the new year. So definitely tune into that one. But yeah, so Cook had arrived the previous autumn from Newfoundland, carrying a portfolio of maps. So good actually that they made the Admiralty melt with joy. I mean, he was brilliant, methodical, and just cool as a cucumber under pressure. Very calm. And crucially, having spent years surveying rugged coastlines in dreadful weather, he had proven he could lead men into the unknown without fuss or theatrics. So
I like it.
within weeks of the decision to prepare the Endeavour, Cook was quietly appointed to command her. And by 25th of May, 1768, he was officially a lieutenant. And by the 27th, he was standing on deck at Deptford, hoisting his commissioning pennant. Now, Banks, meanwhile, was watching all of this unfold with growing excitement, right? He knew the Royal Society was organizing this grand astronomical expedition, and he knew they would need naturalists, draftsmen, collectors. And he knew, because he always knew, that he, Joseph Banks, could make himself indispensable. So he set about doing just that. He spoke with Philip Stephens, the first secretary of the Admiralty, and another connection he made. This guy was a connection made at the British Museum. And so he charmed him, he impressed him. And then with a touch of aristocratic swagger, he offered to finance an entire natural history team himself. And the Royal Society, whose members include some of the wealthiest men in Britain, yet somehow never had any money, accepted this with gratitude, of course.
That's a very Joseph Banks move. Oh, you're short of thousands of pounds? Don't worry, I'll bring my checkbook and half a Soho along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's that, if he wants to do something, he's going to pull out that checkbook. He's going to make it happen.
He'll make it happen.
He's going to make it happen. So Banks would actually later say, when friends urged him to do the traditional grand tour of Europe, he said, quote, "Every blockhead does that. My grand tour shall be one round the whole globe." And this wasn't bravado. I mean, this was conviction. An entire unknown continent might be out there. And not just that, but plants that no European had ever imagined. Fruits, seeds, medicines, wealth beyond measure. And, not in gold, but in knowledge. So wealth and knowledge.
Right.
And then into this mixture came a twist somewhat worthy of a novel. So on May 20th, 1768, just as the Admiralty debated where Cook should sail, Captain Samuel Wallace arrived unexpectedly in London, battered by illness, but carrying quite spectacular news. He had discovered an island in the heart of Maskelyne's search rectangle, an island abundant with food, water, friendly people, and an anchorage ideal for observing the transit. And that was Tahiti.
Well, that's a much better destination than Newfoundland.
It is. And again, my apologies to Newfoundland here. Okay, I know we have listeners in Canada, and maybe we have some Newfoundland listeners. I know we're giving Newfoundland a bit of a bashing here, but to be honest, I've heard very nice things about the place. But anyway, just disclaimer there. But yeah, suddenly the voyage had a destination. Okay, so we have a clear fixed point on the map, a place of warmth, abundance, and for Banks, unimaginable botanical riches. And so on the 9th of June, the Royal Society formally approved Tahiti as the target. And by July, the Admiralty had given Cook his instructions. The Endeavour would sail for the South Pacific. And Banks, thanks to months of persuasion, had secured his place aboard. So you can just picture him now in early 1768, again, mid-20s, wealthy, restless, brimming with anticipation, a man who had left a beautiful, I would say unofficial fiancée behind to sail to the far edge of the world. A man, in other words, about to step through the door of history.
Say, wondering if the accommodations aboard this Endeavour were satisfactory, though, enough, John.
Well, I mean, he would soon find out, because now we're going to dig into the assembly of this extraordinary voyage, right? Because this doesn't just happen on its own. This takes planning. So Let's now look at the people Banks gathered because he was going to do this by himself, right? And not only the people with the supplies, he's going to need tools and equipment, and of course all the chaos that comes leading up to the voyage around the world. I mean, this is a big project.
Right. So it's 1768, and this really must have been the most chaotic bit of packing in the entire history of the Royal Navy, or at least very high up there, right? So, because before the Endeavor could even slip out of Plymouth Sound and into legend, it had to be filled, absolutely stuffed with people, equipment, animals, wine, scientific gadgets, drawing paper, and I would say epileptics, landscape artists, a watchmaker's toolkit. I mean, and at least one very bad tempered goat. Okay. Seriously.
Yes, we're going to come to the goat.
But perhaps we should start where all great British scientific endeavors begin, with committees.
Of
Yeah.
course.
That's what you were thinking, right?
Always enjoy a good committee.
Yeah. The Royal Society had decided that the transit of Venus needed to be observed from somewhere in the South Pacific, ideally Tahiti. This was the great astronomical challenge of the age, the key to calculating the distance between Earth and the sun. But for Joseph Banks, the Venus business was, well, fine, a bit of celestial theater, all very important stuff. Yes, yes, definitely. But what really caught his imagination was the side mission, a chance to roam across oceans and continents, collectively planting seeds and fruits and specimens and like which European scientists have never seen before, right? And again, at this point, he was 25, 25. And with a personal fortune large enough to make the crown look a bit tight fisted by comparison. He poured money into the expedition, upwards of 10,000 pounds of his own cash, millions in today's terms, enough to create his own floating botanical laboratory, John.
Wow, 10,000 pounds. That's almost double his annual salary from his inheritance.
Right?
But to bring the cast of characters, I mean, now let's bring in the cast of characters that basically turn Cook's ship into a traveling university. I mean, that's what this seems to be
Oh,
becoming.
exactly. Well, I mean, while Cook assembled a crew capable of navigating the vast Pacific, Banks was assembling a team capable of understanding it. The Royal Society originally asked that Banks be allowed to bring 7 companions by the time he admirably signed off. There were 8 plus Banks himself. A scientific circus, everyone. So let's meet them, shall we?
Yeah,
First,
do it.
there was a Swedish naturalist, Daniel Solander, Linnea's star pupil, and the man who essentially taken over Banks's botanical education. Solander had been quietly cataloging the British Museum's natural history collection for years. But when Banks mentioned the voyage over dinner, Solander leapt to his feet, eyes shining, and declared, I want to go with you. A moment of pure enlightenment, right?
Yeah,
Little drama too in there. So then there was Herman Sporing, the serious Finnish watchmaker turned naturalist. Sidney Parkinson, the young artist hired to sketch every plant, creature, and landscape they encountered. Alexander Buchan, the landscape painter with severe epilepsy, whose condition Banks rather awkwardly may not have fully appreciated, and Banks' small entourage of servants, Peter Briscoe and 16-year-old James Roberts from Lincolnshire, plus 2 black servants from his London household, Thomas Richmond and George Darlton. A strangely intimate group packed together for years on a cramped ship, all funded by Banks, all following this young aristocrat into the unknown world.
yeah. And also, Patrick, you didn't mention the dogs.
Oh,
Can't
yeah,
forget
yeah,
the
yeah.
dogs.
The Greyhound and a bitch called Lady. Not to mention the ship's 3 cats and the goat that had already circumnavigated the globe.
The goat. And again, I told you we're going to come back to the goat. So this has got to be history's most famous goat. So quick sidetrack. So apparently this goat had sailed on the Dolphin with Wallace. So the guy that had found Tahiti that came in like saying, I found the place where you can see this stuff. And this goat provided milk for the captain and his officers. And her moment of fame came when the Dolphin first reached Tahiti, the first European ship to do so, mind you. And so apparently a member of Tahitian royalty was welcomed aboard the ship, but our goat was having just none of it. So when the Tahitian man bent down for whatever reason. I don't know if he was bowing or picking something up. She ends up ramming him in the rear and sent him flying. And, and this guy was so frightened of this goat that he jumped overboard to get away from her. And apparently, members of his whole entourage followed in suit. So you have all these Tahitians that are jumping off this boat because this goat is intimidating. So seems like a good goat to have around on a long voyage.
I mean, you would think so, right?
Yeah,
Who doesn't want that? The goat sounds like the goat. The goat of all goats, everyone.
goat
This
of goats.
goat. But yeah, so between the botanists, the draftsmen, the sailors, the servants, the astronomers, the dogs, the cats, and of course the goat, Cook's cabin quickly became less the captain's quarters and more, well, an early prototype of Kew Gardens.
Yeah,
And Cook himself, famously disciplined and tidy, must have looked at the jars, nets, presses, maps, artists' papers, and stacks of specimens crammed in his great cabin and wondered whether commanding of the Endeavor might prove a test not to seamanship, but to his patience.
yeah. It really is amazing just how crowded the ship was. I mean, we've only mentioned the people and animals at this point. I mean,
Right?
do you mind? Why don't I paint a quick picture of the ship itself and what else had to be considered? Because it's just it's quite impressive, actually. So, as mentioned a few minutes ago, this was originally a coal ship. Okay, and it was used to carry just 13 people, but now it's being transformed into a vessel that could accommodate over 90 people. I mean, that's a huge increase of people. And I mean, the sailors, of course, were used to living in tight quarters. That's not uncommon, but this put a whole new meaning to that. Not only did they have to worry about where people were going to sleep and stay, but they also have to find room for, the ship's three new crafts. So they had a longboat, a yawl, and pinnace, which is a captain's official boat, as well as Banks' tiny skiff and armaments for the vessel, which included 10 4-pounder carriage guns and 12 swivels or blunderbusses.
Yeah, I love it. They got the blunderbusses back. And
Right.
how big were those guns exactly, John?
So glad you asked. I came prepared because I knew, we're not experts of naval warfare on this podcast, but sometimes we like to get into some of those details. So the guns, each carriage gun was 6 feet long and weighed up around 1,300 pounds. So not exactly tiny. And then, of course, besides all the other stuff I already listed, you need provisions, you need to eat, and that included. So I'm gonna run off a list here, just to give you context of what this ship is carrying. So it included bags of bread, 21,226 pounds, flour in barrels, 9,000 pounds, beer, 1,200 gallons, spirits, 1,600 gallons, salt beef, 4,000 pieces, raisins, 2,500 pounds, sugar, 1,500 pounds, peas, 187 bushels, vinegar, 500 gallons, wheat, 120 bushels, oil, 120 gallons, malt and hogsheads, 40 bushels, salt, 20 bushels, sauerkraut, 7,800 pounds roughly, and salt pork, 6,000 pieces. So a lot of stuff there.
Wow.
And it was so again, you can see how crowded this is getting. And it ends up being so tight that Cook, the captain of the ship, who would have expected to have his sole control of the ship's great cabin, would actually have to share the space with Banks and his team. So it's tight. It's
Still,
tight.
everything was nearly ready, though. Okay, the ship was refitted at the Crown's expense of 5,394 pounds. The Admiralty gave Cook, his final instructions on the 30th of July, sail to Port Royal by way of Cape Horn with optional stops in Brazil or the Falklands, but definitely stop in Madeira to pick up as much wine as the ship could hold, right? One suspects the crew was very attentive to this order.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Banks, who had spent the night before departure drinking heavily in London and, ready, failing to break the news to his partner, Harriet, until the very last moment, finally made his way down to the coast. Poor Harriet, heartbroken, resolved to hide herself away in the countryside while he was gone, a rather melancholy footnote to what, for Banks, was the redefining adventure of his life. And on the 25th of August, with Plymouth's gray skies overhead and a final supply of what beer and water aboard, Cook signaled that the Endeavor would sail. The pinnace was sent to fetch Banks and Solander. The youngest naturalist climbed aboard with the easy confidence of someone long accustomed to, I would say, deference from men of Cook situation, as he rather lofty put it. And at precisely 2 p.m., the ship's bell struck 4 times. Fresh winds filled the sails, and the Endeavor, with nearly 100 men aboard, 10 of them already hardened Pacific veterans, slipped out toward the open sea.
And yet, Patrick, no one on board, not even Cook, had the faintest idea of what was coming.
No, they couldn't have. Storms, shipwrecks, death, discovery on an unimaginable scale, encounters with people and cultures and British had never that they've never seen, John. And for Joseph Banks, a botanical harvest so vast it would change European understanding of the natural world. But all of this for the episodes to come. We'll end here today with sail set, the wine stowed, the goats braced with for mischief, right? And Joseph Banks standing at the rail, eyes fixed on the horizon.
Yes, it's getting exciting. So in the next episode, the adventures of the Endeavor.
That's right, everyone. The journey begins, and what awaits them comes across the ocean with test, right, and will of every man aboard. So if you wanna keep listening and you wanna jump on this, get on the History of Fresh Produce Club, and you can binge listen to everything right here, right now. Am I right, John?
That's right. And get at least most of the complete series right away. You can join that Endeavor boat, find out where they're headed and what adventure awaits them right now. So if you don't want to join the History of Fresh Produce Club, we will still be here for you. You'll just have to wait for the next ship.
Maybe.
So, so until next time, whenever that might be, it's goodbye for me, John Papp.
Goodbye for me, Patrick Kelly.